we may not be Ava DuVernay, we may not be Michelle Obama, but we have small ways that we can impact change within our own circles, and you just never know how that's going to inspire, what seed you're going to plant with one person that could blossom into something else.
Welcome to Latinx Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Carolina Groppa, a Hollywood producer whose self-awareness and belief in herself led her to become an Emmy-nominated producer. And she's here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Carolina Groppa, welcome to Latinx Can.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the show because when, the majority of the people that we talk to are mostly technical people in the STEM field. That's just because that's what we have access to in our network. But thankfully, one of those people in our network connected us, and I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Kat, if you're listening.
Yes,
for putting us in touch. This is amazing.
Yeah.
So how about we start by you telling us a little bit about where you come from and the journey that brought you to the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in São Paulo, Brazil. And when I was almost 9 years old, 8.5, if you want to be specific, my parents decided to migrate here to the States and found sort of had a tribe down in or up in, I guess depends on where you look at, in Richmond, Virginia. My mom had a sister there. She still lives there. And so they said, hey, come be here, come try life over here. And my parents at the time had 3 kids. I was the middle of 2 brothers. And they wanted to seek a better life and better opportunities for us. And so they just went for it, which, looking back, like imagining them in their 30s, the age I am now, and picking up and starting a whole new life in a new country when they didn't speak the language with 3 small children. It is really truly astonishing, the courage that they had. And I think that experience instilled in me a sense of pride and my work ethic and my hustle for everything I have achieved and hope to continue to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine. I mean, I think for me, it's easy to imagine myself just moving and just picking up myself, but with a family, and it's a huge risk. You never know what you're gonna find on the other side. So it just illustrates how much courage they have to have, and how the desire to find something better for themselves and their kids, and it drives that motivation really. And so you say you were about 8.5 years old when you moved to the States. So you probably didn't speak English, and you grew up, at 8 years old, you're still young, but you're already old enough that you understand what's going on around you. And then you were in a different country with a different language. How was that process for you growing up?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never realized until very recently that experience shaped me, right? But in many ways it was a trauma because I wasn't fully aware that we were moving to the States. My parents didn't want to make a whole thing about it for immigration issues. We came here legally, but still, they just didn't want us to have too much time to think about it, I guess, and so it was interesting to come, we came in the summer, and by that fall to be starting school. And at the time there was no ESOL program. There were really no other kids who weren't American. And so it was very much an outlier and a weirdo alien kid. I always like to tell the story that I also didn't have my 4 front teeth. So I was just a weird kid. I didn't have a lot of friends, and it was just an interesting time. But what's interesting is that I don't have too many memories of that time in my life. Like those first 6 months, I can't recall the period of the transition rather from being completely lost in school to being fluent. Like I couldn't tell you how that happened. The only memories I have in the school were of my second grade teacher, this lovely woman, Miss Kennedy, who went out of her way to like put signs on everything and make sure I could associate the words with the phonetic sound, and stayed after school to help me. And I ended up, eating lunch with her every day because I didn't know how to socialize. And I think all of that really, like I said, instilled this sense of being an overachiever and always being like a teacher's pet, because I recognized somehow that was how I was going to make my stamp in whatever it was that I was here to do. But it was challenging, and I think I'm grateful. We actually have a ton of like home videos of that time in our life.
Nice.
And so I watch myself, and basically my brothers and we just did everything together. So we would stay home when my parents were working and just play together. And so they were really at that point when we all we had were each other, and it was really interesting to see that, especially during that first year of that time in our lives.
Yeah, that must have brought you closer as siblings, because, you, in a way, you were all experiencing the same thing at the same time, and you only had each other to, because probably even your parents didn't quite understand what was going on for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at that age, we weren't aware that that's what was happening. I think now, being the age that I am, being an adult, looking back, watching this footage, I can see, wow, like this it's so clear to me, like looking as an adult, right? Looking back on the experience. But yeah, I would say that, we definitely had a friendship back then that was rooted in being kids and playing together. And I feel very fortunate and grateful that, 20 some years later, we are still very close and friends as adults, and it's really awesome.
That's great. And so, and you grew up here in the States, and even maybe at that time when you were 10 years old, you didn't quite understand or knew what was going on. But certainly you grew up here in the States with a very strong Brazilian identity, I imagine. And I wonder if you ever felt like you were growing up as a teenager and as an immigrant in the States.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that by the time I was 12, my dad got a job in South Florida. So I only spent like about 3 years in Virginia before we went to South Florida, where there's a high concentration of, all ethnicities, all cultures. Yeah. And so by the time we moved down there, I didn't feel as much of an outcast. But then I started to realize that everybody's got a class system for everything. And even being a Brazilian Latina, like I wasn't Puerto Rican, I wasn't Cuban, I wasn't Dominican. A lot of people said, you're not really Latina, like you don't speak Spanish. So there's like a lot of separation even within sort of Latinx umbrella. And I started to realize that I sort of felt more comfortable with some of my American friends early on. And then by the time I hit puberty and became a teenager, I sort of was clamoring to reconnect with my Brazilian roots. And I started making a lot of friends with kids in the school who were Brazilian. I mean, like Brazilian dancing. And this is before like you could just YouTube stuff, so my cousins would come every summer and bring me like a mixed CD with like the top 10 like summer songs of Brazil, and I would like learn the dances and stuff. But yeah, and I think that was that period where I was like, I'm this hybrid, right? I'm not 100% American and I'm not really 100% Brazilian. And at that time, my life was about half and half. Half had spent there and half here. So I think it took a long time, not that I've arrived even today, to sort of understand that I am this duality and this hybrid of cultures. And while I like to say I have very strong Brazilian roots, my values are very American, right? As after being here most of my life at this point. It's where I identify with others and sharing those values.
Yeah. And I wonder how that process goes. And this is why I asked you the question, because I grew up in Venezuela. And so I very much feel Venezuelan and I just live in the States, Yeah. And so for me, it's easy to just pick up and say, I was thinking about this. And even if I lived, I don't know, in Japan, people would ask me what home is, and home is always going to be Venezuela for me, because I arrived here, even though I've lived here for like 13 years now, and I probably will live a really long time, hopefully here. I always, that the value system and then the culture, all of that was shaped even before I got here. So I feel very, very much Venezuelan, but I also understand that, those first generation Latino, Latinx Americans, you have that culture, but you really grew up as an American as well. So I find that so interesting.
Yeah. And I think it's, my children will be first generation. And so it's very important for me to hold on to my language and my culture and the customs, the Brazilian customs. And so I hope to raise my kids in that. But I know even for me, how hard it is to live connected to my Portuguese, Brazilian identity. So I hope that I can instill those values in them. But you're right. I think like, had it even been like 5 years later, I think I was such at a moldable age, I guess. I don't know if that's the word, but like that I think if I had come in my teens, I would have had a completely different experience and sense of self. But yeah, I think because I, from an early age, just really adapted to my environment because I had to, right, to survive. Right. It just became very clear that I was always going to be this weird kid. And I also wonder if we had stayed in Virginia and I didn't have access to so much Brazilian culture like I did in Florida, if I would have skewed even more American, or not. Maybe I would have really gone out of my way to make it a priority. Who's to say? But
but what an amazing skill set you have now when you're able to navigate the two cultures, right? And like serve even as not as a translator, but as a representation of both. And I think that's so amazing. And like you say, you wish, you hope that you raise your kids with the both identities or a mixture of both. Yeah. But I think that's what makes this place so amazing, like in the country, because you have representation of so many different cultures, but there's always something that unites us, which is those values of being in this country and wanting to, have the best for the country as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
And so once you moved, you went through your high school years there, and then you got accepted into the University of Central Florida, I think on a full ride scholarship, right?
I did. At the time, the state of Florida had a really wonderful program where if you were getting a certain level of grades, certain level of GPA, you were eligible for either a full ride or it was like 75% tuition covered. They had all these like markers. I got very lucky. I happened to be going to college at a time when that was happening because my younger brother, who's 4 years younger, by the time he went to college, that program didn't even exist. So I got in like just completely by chance. But I was a very good student. I was, like I said, very ambitious. I graduated top 8% of my class and had really good grades. And I dreamed of going to school out of state. But then when I went to visit universities out of state and saw the cost, my mom was like, if you want to get in debt, that's on you. But if you want a free scholarship, if you want a free college education, here you go, go anywhere in state. And so I went to UCF, University of Central Florida, with the intention of studying performing arts. I wanted to go to BFA in theater. I didn't get into the BFA program. And so when I was there, I sort of minored in theater and started studying psychology and business and really enjoyed it, but sort of started... I was always I still am very antsy, and there was some belief that I had that I couldn't wait until I was a certain age to come out to Los Angeles. At that point, I already knew I wanted to pursue acting. I wanted a career in the arts. I wanted to be in entertainment some way. And I knew that, there was always going to be a ceiling in Orlando because at the time, the height of what you could do was work at Disney, as one of like the face characters. And fun fact, I did audition for Disney. I wanted to be a princess, but I was too short. You have to be at least 5'5". And so they were like, no, you can only be like one of the characters that are in the suits. And I could only be like a chipmunk. And I was like, you know what? I'm good. So, and I had visited Los Angeles and had come out here to tour a conservatory. And I knew that immediately when I set foot in LA, I felt at home. So it's interesting to say, to have you say that, for you, Venezuela is home. But for me, like Florida is where my parents live. Florida is where I spent a good chunk of my years, but home really is LA, especially now that I've been here 14 years, almost 15 years, and where I think my roots are, where I will have my family and continue to be, especially as my career continues to blossom here. But yeah, so I got my associate's degree in Florida and decided to come out here. I auditioned for a conservatory and pitched my parents, who were not very happy by the decision to leave a full ride to come out here to pursue something silly and crazy, but they supported it, And my pitch to my dad was like, look, you guys left everything to come pursue your dream in this country, and you created us and raised us to be the kind of people that goes after what they want. And so this is what I want. And here's all the reasons why this is the time to do it. And I said, look, I'll go. It's a 2-year program. If it doesn't work, I'll come back, and that's, this is the moment to try it. And they said yes. And, and there's no regrets. Everything happens the way it's supposed to. But this was in 2006. And I think had I waited till 2008 to move out here, it would have been a really grueling year. I think I would not have lasted that year when we had the economy crash. And then there was also a writer's strike. So the years of like 2008 to 2010 were just very challenging years, not a good time to be starting anything in a new place. And so, and so much to my surprise, they agreed. And here I was, this little 20-year-old kid who felt very grown up. I always thought I was way more grown up than I was, who came out here ready to take the industry by storm and who took everything way too seriously. And that's kind of what led me west.
You decided to move to LA then in 2006?
Yeah.
And then we had the financial crisis of 2008, right. And in between the writer's strike.
Yeah.
So those were significant challenges that were definitely outside of your control at the time of transition. So how did you make it work? You say that you were a person maybe from your, immigrant background. It's like sometimes as an immigrant, there isn't an option to fail. So you get creative and try to make it, try to keep your head above water. How was that for you?
I think being in school helped. And, I took that very seriously because for me to come out here to do this conservatory was a big expense. My parents refinanced their house to help pay for it. So I went from costing no money, having won a bunch of scholarships on top of my full ride. I had gotten a bunch of other scholarships I had applied for because, again, I was an overachiever that actually helped finance my first year in college and rent and stuff like that. So I went from that to like being an expense to my parents. And so I wasn't going to let those circumstances get in the way of what I was here to do. And so it's one of those things where you just find a way through. And I just didn't, like you said, I didn't see coming back home as an option. I had committed to 2 years and I did my 2 years. But yeah, when everything started kind of shutting down a bit, I thought, well, I had been doing just the actor hustle, which is an incredibly hard grind. You have to really have a passion for this thing. And this was at a time in the industry, which not that long ago, but feels like forever ago, where people could literally say to you, casting directors, oh, like you're not Latina enough, like you're not like you're too white, like where are you from, and so I got put in this box, and where I was considered ethnically ambiguous was the term they used to use, and I didn't understand it because at the time I spoke enough Spanish to like book a Burger King commercial and sell you a Whopper. But it was just this, it was like this thing over me all the time. And so I reached a point in 2008, 2009 where I got depressed and I did almost move back home because I'm like, man, I've been grinding it out. It's been 3 years. Like, and when you're young, you think it's like, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30 and famous, if not, before. Yeah. So I just was like, I've been here 3 years. Nothing's happening. This is ridiculous. I was doing the whole hustle and the grind of it all. And I wasn't getting the traction. And so my mom was like, well, if you think you've tried everything and you're ready to come back home, then yeah, of course, we'll always take you. And it wasn't too late. I could have come back and still finished my college degree. But I was like, all right, well, what can I do? How do I take matters into my own hands? And that's when I had this seed planted. Well, you got to create your own work. And I wasn't really writing. I didn't have those skill sets at the time. So what occurred to me was I just had this very clear thought. All right, I'm going to produce a piece of theater. I'm going to put on a play. I'm going to get someone to give me money to do this play, and I'm going to cast myself as the lead, and that's going to be the turning point of my career as an actor. I'm going to get better representation. I'm going to be seen by casting directors. And I did that. And it's sort of through a series of very crazy, miraculous, serendipitous events that led me there. And that was May 2010.
You must be a very good pitcher, because you got your parents to give you money to move to the LA, and then you also got somebody to finance your theater play. You must be very good at
I would say so.
People.
I think that it's like being a good pitcher is really just having a true passion for the thing that you're saying you want someone to believe in, right? You're saying, I have this dream. The dream is to move. The dream is to get a movie financed. The dream is to start a new business. And people are investing in you, because when you don't have a track record, all you have is your word and your enthusiasm for something. And I've learned that that can go much further than experience most of the time. And my parents, of course, they just wanted to support me and what I was doing. But with the play, it was one of those things where I put in my head that I needed $20,000 to produce a play, which was more than I needed, but not enough money. And through a series of random circumstances, I met a guy who was just interested in investing and promoting people who were following their passions. And after the experience, he said to me, he's like, all I want from you is for you to pay this forward, because someone showed me this kindness and this belief in me along the way. So you have to pay it forward. And I that experience of producing that play, being the lead of that play while holding 3 part-time jobs to actually afford to live while doing all of that, it really transformed me. And it became the thing that after that, after that experience, I got a ton of people wanting me, friends and colleagues, to produce their shorts, to produce their thing. And so I kept getting all of these sort of producing offers where acting was so difficult. Producing was like, welcome, we've been waiting for you. We need you, So I just said, all right, I'm going to keep yes-anding this while I continue to pursue my career as an actor.
And so then that circumstance of, sort of creating or needing to create your own opportunities, like you said, led you to sort of reinvent yourself and realize that maybe being a producer could be a career path. What does it entail to be a producer, and how do you sort of welcome it into your life?
I think that when I discovered what producing was, I think like a lot of people, when you think of entertainment, movies, television, you think of the writer, the director, the actors, the things you can see, right? We don't really think about the people behind the scenes. I know I certainly didn't. Even after years of being in the business, I still couldn't tell you what a producer did. And when I had the experience of putting that play together, I was like, oh, that's what a producer does? Like, I've been this way my whole life. I'm always the person who is enabling things to happen, putting it together, juggling multiple things at once, and thriving in chaos, and like just really leaning into it and finding joy and the curiosity of like, no, I've never done this one thing, but I want to figure out how to do that. I'm just fascinated by the process of anything. And so for me, it was clear that like I had a skill set that was very innate to who I am, that I could leverage to get where I was going. And I also had, at the time, I was a nanny for Bob Odenkirk, the writer-actor, and he would say, this industry is very hard. And if there's anything you can do besides act, you should do it, because acting it's not up to you. You don't really get to control the success, especially at the time. I think now it's a little different. I think there's a lot of opportunities to write, create, share your own work through all the millions of mediums that exist. But at the time, you didn't have that much access. So I really listened to that. And so I created a new dream. And that dream was that I was going to learn how to produce. And then I was eventually going to create my own opportunities as an actor and have the knowledge of how to make a movie or a TV show and insert myself in those projects.
Okay. All right. So break it down for me. For a person who is completely out of the industry, what does it mean to be a producer?
Okay. So what I do is I'm an independent film producer, and I have strong roots in physical production. So what that means is there are many producers. In fact, I have a podcast called Angle on Producers that used to be called Life with Kaka. It's now called Angle on Producers, that where I chat with other producers to sort of demystify what do producers do. There's so many different titles. If you're talking about film or television or studios, it's like really overwhelming. But in the world that I operate in, where I sort of came up in the trenches, I'm the person who is literally on the ground executing. So you have a script and you have a budget and you have a schedule in mind of how you want to do this. And you come to me and you say, hey, I have this project I want to do, and this is the amount of money I want to spend. How do we do it? And so I'm the person that helps you figure out how we're going to actually execute. So what's on the script to get it on the screen, and everything that happens in the middle of that process, that's what I do. And so it's working closely with the creatives on the ground on the actual production, physical production of the movie in this case. And so a lot of my experience comes from feature films, documentaries, and some commercial sort of work as well. So, and all of that is different shades of the same color, you know? Okay. You just have different languages and different people that are in power or responsible. But at the end of the day, you're doing the same thing. You're executing. You are playing various roles, because sometimes you have to be a cheerleader, sometimes you have to be a mom, and sometimes you have to be, you know, the bad guy, and sometimes you just have to be all kinds of things. You're often a therapist, but you are the right hand usually to the creative filmmaking team, guiding them through the day-to-day of getting the project or the film, in this case, in the can, in a hard drive, so they can go off to post-production and make the movie.
Okay. And so your education and sort of your formal training was as an actor. How do you then gain the knowledge and the skills to become a producer and now, you know, an Emmy-nominated producer?
I think that people who, and after 50 episodes of my podcast, I think what I've learned is that it's a personality type. The kinds of people that are drawn to this specific thing are people who thrive in chaos, are people who are hungry to learn. Most of them have really crazy, interesting paths that you never could have predicted would have led them to producing. And I think mine is no different. You know, when I was mostly just acting, I would be on set and I would be just anxious waiting in my trailer. I wanted to be on the set. I wanted to know what everybody was doing. I wanted to understand, okay, who's that guy with the clipboard? Who's he talking? What's he saying on the walkie? Like, I wanted to understand how the whole process came together. And so that was a signal that I wanted more than just my small piece of the pie, right? And so I started to follow that curiosity and watching and learning and just trying to shadow people, going up to people and saying, I don't know how to do this, but can I come learn from you? And so it really was by honestly like knocking on doors and elbowing my way into rooms and opportunities that no one really handed to me. And that is like, you know, immigrant hustle 101, like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and there's a story, you know, in my preparation for this podcast, I heard a couple of different episodes that you were a guest on a podcast as well. And there was a story about a producer that you admired, and you reached out to that producer to help you sort of develop your skills. Can you tell us the story?
Yeah. So in 2015, at this point, I had been producing for about 5 years. I had done enough shorts and, you know, unpaid jobs and sort of through, again, a serendipitous series of events, I got to produce my first feature project. And in my world, shorts are great. They're all really good experience. But when you get a feature length project, whether it's a documentary or a narrative film, you get it into a festival, that's when people start to kind of look at you and take you a little more seriously. There's just a stamp of validation that comes with it. It's a whole other conversation for another day. But I produced this documentary called Autism in Love, which premiered at Tribeca in 2015, which is one of the bigger festivals here in the U.S. Went on to become Emmy nominated. Hence, that's where my Emmy nomination comes from. But I knew, okay, I don't want to get stuck doing docs. I kind of stumbled into the doc thing. I wasn't looking for it. It found me. And I was like, okay, I have to follow this because this is taking me somewhere. And I'm so glad I did. It's still one of the projects I'm proudest of date. Yeah. But I wanted to get in the narrative space, which is movies, basically. You know, when you think of a movie, it's a narrative film. And one of my favorite movies is this movie called Short Term 12, which had come out a couple of years prior. And so I found that the producer was speaking at a panel, like a no-budget film festival panel, very low-key, with a couple of other admirable ladies. And so I went to this panel, and after the panel, I went up to her and I just said, I think you're incredible, and I've been following your career, and here's who I am, and here's what I've done. So I wasn't coming up to her saying, I have no experience, let me learn from you. I was saying, hey, I've done all of these things, but I want to go where you've been going, and I don't know how to get there. But if there's ever an opportunity to learn from you, I would love that.
Yeah.
And she was impressed by that, and I didn't come across as like a weirdo or desperate. Like I said, I had done enough where you could look me up and go, okay, this is someone who's like actively working towards this. I think oftentimes you get approached by people like that and they have absolutely no experience, and that's okay. But you just have to be careful when you are reaching for an ask like that to make sure you're prepared if the person says yes. And I just knew I was prepared to go to that next level. So we went to tea and we really connected and vibed, and it ends up that we have the same birthday. And so I was like, we're both Scorpios. And that woman is Elizabeth Hughes, who produced Short Term 12, which was Brie Larson's first movie that kind of put her on the map and catapulted her to become who she is today. She's most people may recognize her from The Room, where she won an Academy Award, and Captain Marvel. And ever since that, then from 2015 on, I did, I think, 3 or 4 features with Elizabeth. And till this day, she's a good friend and recommends me for projects. And I would say was a turning point of my career, having her say yes, having her believe in me, having her mentor me and teach me, and just kind of throw me again into the chaos that was a whole different side of producing I had not been exposed to. But I was ready to swim, and I think it showed that I was ready to like grind it out.
I think from that story, there's 2 things that I find very interesting. The first one is something that I feel like I identified with, and is that this, want or yearn to really look for those opportunities, not wait for the opportunities to come to you. You mentioned that you identified that Elizabeth was speaking at a panel and you prepared for it, right? One thing that I wanted to ask you, though, is like, you really have to find that courage within yourself to be able to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to this person and I'm going to do the best I can. How do you, get over that hurdle?
I think there's always fear, there's always the fear of all of the things that come up for all of us. And I still have that. It's not that I'm fearless. It's just that I push through despite the fear, because I would rather know than wonder, what if. I would rather be the person who tries and goes up and says, it didn't work. But at least I walk away from that knowing that I put my best foot forward and everything is a lesson. Maybe it wasn't meant to be. I always try to look at things that way. If things aren't aligning in that moment, like maybe step back. There may be some other lesson you need to learn before you unlock the level to go to this next stage of where you think you're ready to go. I think it takes a lot of self-awareness, which I certainly didn't have back then, to recognize, are you really ready for certain things? I think that I just kind of assumed I was and projected confidence, which is just innate to who I am, that led people believe, all right, this girl can probably figure it out. And so much of producing really is just being the kind of person who thrives in like, I don't have the answer, but I'm going to find it. I'm going to find out. And so much of my journey has been shades of that. And so I think it's just, I get nervous and I still get like very like, oh my gosh, I clamp up and stuff, but I just eventually do it. And then it's always a wonder, like I have yet to regret a time when I've just gone for it, So yeah. I don't know if in the movies or the cartoons that you saw when you were little, you would see this concept of butterflies in your stomach. I feel those, but they don't feel like butterflies in my stomach. It feels very uncomfortable. Yes, they actually say that when you're a kid, it's like butterflies in your stomach, and when you become an adult, you just feel like vomiting. It's like not such a cute metaphor, but it's true. And I think it's a good sign to me, because it's like you care so much that it messes with you emotionally so much, right? And everybody's on their own journey, but it's like if you can taper that and just kind of take a beat and just be like, okay, like I'm not, you have to acknowledge that those feelings exist and they're real, but you also have to understand that everybody probably feels like that. And for example, now knowing Elizabeth and being her friend, I know she was extremely nervous. She doesn't like meeting new people. She's like, it's not her. She likes to be behind the scenes. Being on a panel is like very exposing for her. She was super nervous that day. So if you stop and think, if I'm nervous, other people are probably nervous too. Then you just see that we're all just humans navigating this earth. Not any one of us is like God. So it's just trying to identify and connect on a more human level, as opposed to putting whoever it is you're trying to reach on this pedestal and going, oh my God, they're this person. It's like, no, they're just another person having a day, and you get to have a moment, a conversation. Maybe it leads somewhere, maybe it doesn't, but in that moment, just be a person that is worth talking to for 3 minutes. If that's all you get, don't be weird or come up to someone without knowing them and shove your business card in their face. Think if you were on the other side of that. No one likes to have that energy towards them. So don't put that out.
Yeah, that's great advice. And anywhere, right? Like even if you're just applying for a job, I can remember my days of going to a career fair at school, and those were the most awkward times, right? But it's true. At the end of the day, you try to make it less awkward and more comfortable.
And it's a skill, honestly. It is not something that people who project that they have had to teach themselves, and it comes with failure. It comes with, honestly, like practicing with lower stakes circumstances, So even if you're just like at a house party, whenever that's a thing again, or you're in an environment where there's like a new person that walks into a room and you're like, oh gosh, there's a new person in this room and I'm not the kind of person who likes to say hello to new people. Just go up and say hello to that person anyway, just to say hello. And then just you get that, you start to understand that that's always going to come up, that trigger, and you're just going to like shush it and go away. And if that person's mean to you, that's okay. But you're practicing that skill every time. So when the person you've dreamed your whole life of meeting is standing before you or in an elevator with you, you know how to navigate that.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said that I found really interesting right now is that you said you were prepared if she said yes. If when you approached Elizabeth, if she said yes, you were prepared for the next step of that conversation. I find that interesting because maybe sometimes people really muster the courage to reach out, but then they don't believe in themselves enough to say, oh, this person might say yes, and what do I do next, right? That was in your case, but like, what would you advise other people who may be in that similar situation?
I think you have to really take inventory of what it is you want and what your goals are, right? And in the world that I operate in, it's like you have to really be honest with yourself. Like at the time, I had produced so many commercials, and so I knew that like, all right, I can handle running a small team of people for these projects. So I feel like there's something about this that I'm ready for, even though I don't know all of the things. I know I'm going to learn quickly. I know I'm going to figure it out. I know I'm going to work really hard and never misrepresent someone who's giving me an opportunity. So I think you have to really be honest with yourself. So if the thing that you're trying to do is a big reach, if you have like that level of anxiety, that there is a distinction between butterflies of excitement and then like, oh my God, I actually don't know anything about this. It would be like if I came to you and said, hey, I actually want to switch careers and I want to like be a chemist and all this stuff. And you went, great, okay, here's an opportunity, come to the lab. It's like, I would absolutely fail you and you would be never talk to me again because I don't know the first thing about it. You know what I mean? But if I had some preliminary understanding, or maybe when I went to school, I had 2 years of this kind of thing, I could go, all right, well, I know enough of a baseline that I think I could step into this and be challenged in a good way and figure it out. So it's that distinction, I suppose, like, is this a challenge that kind of takes you to that next level, or is this such a reach that you're not really setting yourself up for success? For example, if I had gone to someone like Spielberg and said the same thing and said, hey, I'm ready to produce a $100 million studio movie, give me a shot. And he said, yep, Carolina, step right in. That would probably not have turned out so great. I would have probably figured it out, but I don't know if I would have spiritually survived in the process, because that is too far of a leap from where I was. So it's kind of trying to see where you're hopping, you know, and how to get there. I hope that answers it. It's so hard to give that kind of advice because it's so specific to each person's journey.
Yeah, but I think what's important is just like understanding that you have to believe in yourself enough that they might say yes, they might buy you on your offer, and then you need to be ready as well and say, okay, these are the things that I could possibly do.
Yeah.
And even if you do feel that fear, because like you said, that fear is it's very natural, it's normal.
Yeah.
Everybody feels it. No matter, I haven't met one person whom haven't felt it. They might seem like they don't, but inside they have a lot of butterflies.
I think it's challenging to be a humble person, but then also really believe that, remember that you are your biggest advocate. No one's going to care about you and your things and what you want and your dreams as much as you. They're just not.
Yeah.
Maybe when you're making someone millions of dollars, like they'll care. But until then, like you have to constantly be your own cheerleader. And it's not a false sense of self or to be egotistical. It's to be humble enough to know that, like, if you're not out there tooting your own horn for the things that you want, there's no one knocking on your door just handing out opportunities. And so how then, I think it's a question of integrity and who you want to be as like an individual in your life, regardless of what industry you're in, and how do you want to show up and how do you want to like grow, especially I think as our jobs are so much of our identity and our lives, you know. I think if you look at the math, I don't know, there's like whatever percentage of your life you spend working is a very large percentage. So then I don't think that the self that is your work, wearing your worker hat and your personal hat should be mutually exclusive. I think they are the same person, especially in my industry where it's all about the skills, yes, the knowledge, yes, but ultimately it's who you are. Like, do I want to be around you for 16 hours a day for months on end? Like, are you a pleasant person? Are you positive? Like, do you have a sense of humor? Are you humble? Or are you going to be a pain in my ass? Because the process is not glamorous of making any kind of art. And it is extremely difficult, you know?
Yeah.
Extremely difficult with a million things that can go wrong along the way. So to get to be in that space, it's a privilege, and thus the least you could do is not be a terrible human being.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds simple, but
yeah, especially under the stress and you know, the very high pace of the job. I imagine. Yeah. So now you have a well-established career as a producer, and in addition to the challenges that you've already discussed, your gender and your Latinx identity add a little bit of an extra layer of challenges that other people don't face. Can you talk a little more about your experience as a female Latinx producer in LA?
Yeah, I think that I never really stopped to think about until the Me Too movement, honestly, how much my career could have been impacted by the fact that I was a woman and a Latinx woman at that, which sounds kind of silly. Like, it was a fact that I thought never applied to me somehow. I was like, well, things are just hard. There's always been hard. I don't know. It's just hard. And then in being a part of that movement and really listening to the stories and connecting with my fellow Latinas and my fellow producers, I started to realize, like, oh, a lot of women have this. It's not just me. Maybe it is because I'm a woman and because I'm a Latina, you know. So it became kind of clear. But I think that one thing that has been a constant challenge, it's a pro and a con, and it's that we sort of talked about this in the pre-interview, that, you know, as a white appearing Latina, there are certain exclusions that I have, right? That certain people don't perceive me to be whatever, or that I've had an easier ride, especially when it comes to discrimination or racism, because I don't fit the mold of what people think about when they think of a stereotypical Latin person. Now, we know that it's a melting pot and we all look all kinds of shades, you know, just like anywhere else in the world. But I do think that I take that privilege, because it is a privilege in many ways, and I recognize that the fact that I look white, I mean, my background is European, I'm Italian, the fact that, you know, I got to come here as a documented person, I understand the struggle for undocumented, my fellow undocumented immigrants. It's a very different ride, right? So it's not lost on me. However, I think it's important that I leverage what I do have, what I have built, to support, to amplify, to continue to be an ally to the movement. And so that is very important for me. And that is after the Me Too movement, after the pandemic, which we're still in. But, you know, the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement really helped solidify for me that my life's work is about, and has always been, but it helped me really identify that it's really about amplifying the voices of people who, like me, haven't been heard. And maybe my reasons for that were because I didn't speak the language, or I've had a sense of identity crisis my whole life in some way. But I understand that struggle to an extent, and would never want to compare my journey to anyone else's immigrant journey. But I get it. I speak the love language, you know? And so I would love to continue to use my career, which I wouldn't say I'm established. I would say that I'm still growing and learning and going places. There's always a new, the markers always keeps moving. The goalpost always keeps moving. And so that is definitely where I'd like to be headed, is to continue to support.
Yeah. And I think what you say, you know, being a white looking Latina is a privilege. Just like for me, for example, being a PhD Latina is a privilege. And it's one of those things in which, one, recognize your privilege, and two, use it for good. Use it to open doors for somebody else, to help, you know, highlight the stories of other people. Because, you know, I think that the point is not for everybody to suffer, but for those who make it out of the pool, just to create those opportunities for everybody else, you know, to create that community that supports each other.
Exactly. And I think that you being a PhD Latina shouldn't be a privilege. It should be the norm. It should be something that all Latinas, all people, all women, of all colors, all races have access to those opportunities. Period. Full stop.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I don't know if you're familiar. I'm familiar with a comedian. She's a Mexican-American comedian called Cristela Alonso. And she had this show back in the days, maybe 3-4 years ago. She had her own TV sitcom. And she talks a lot about how we were talking about this a little bit earlier, where they put Latinos in like this one bucket, and everybody has to be whatever LA or Hollywood thinks Latinos are, but we know we are very different. We do have very different buckets within the Latinx umbrella, like you said. And everybody talks about a lack of representation in movies, and it's true. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think that sucks. You know, I think that Cristela, many people have been on the face of this movement of talking about this and inclusion and diversity all over. But I think it's interesting because it really starts with Hollywood. Because if you think about it, we can't become what we don't see, right? And we are responsible for creating images and choosing which stories get seen and by whom. So for many years, you didn't see yourself on screen. And so now that there is this global conversation happening around the issue, particularly here in Hollywood, I think it is time for Hollywood executives, period, to wake up that, you know, I think, I don't even know when, but not very soon, I think more than 50% of the American population will be Latino. You know, so this is real and it's coming, whether or not they want it. So embrace the change as opposed to being resistant to the change. And I think a lot of great strides have been made towards inclusion, but I still think it's very surface level. I think there's a lot of, we're going to create a diversity program. We're going to hire, you know, it's almost like for a facade, but the real change behind the scenes isn't quite being made the way I think it needs to, and isn't being done as quickly as it should be, considering how behind we are. And so I think everybody who has a platform should be using their talents to amplify this message, to elevate this cause, because I do think it's extremely important. And it's only going to change if we make it change, you know? So one of the experiences I had last year at Sundance when I went to premiere Sylvie's Love was, you know, there's a Latinx house, which was started by this woman, Olga Segura, and Eva Longoria is a part, and America Ferrara, all these big sort of well-known voices for the movement. And we were all talking about, all of the things and representation. And I was like, yeah, this is all great, but we are not the people, like, we're just sitting in a room at Sundance drinking champagne talking about this. Like, this is not where the change happens. Like, it's important we're having this conversation, but when we leave here, are you actually doing the thing day to day? Are you actually looking at who you're hiring and who you're giving opportunities to? And more importantly, I think that, Latinos who've risen to fame should be reaching down and pulling the people up behind them. There should be, if there aren't, there are some, but more programs where you are sort of training and mentoring the next wave of Latinos, not just in entertainment, but across the board. And it is often felt as a recipient of many like scholarships for being like the Latina, whatever. It often just feels like a tax write-off for a company, or just like a thing that you got to do to keep up with the appearances. And so I think there's a massive conversation. I think that it's brick by brick that we get there, and I do see it happening. And I think the more that the people, especially I speak for within Hollywood, right? The more that the people in power who have control over hiring, over choosing the stories that get told, over what movies and TV shows get financed, the more we can continue to represent not just Latinx people, but all people of color and minorities and their stories, because we are more than just our stories of how we immigrated to this country.
Yeah, there's a lot more than that.
So
yeah, I find it interesting, and I think somebody read a quote from Michelle Obama that I'm going to butcher, but I'm just going to give it a try. It says something like, we talk about women in positions of power everywhere, politics, entertainment, or industry. And it was something like, women are still so glad that we were given a seat at the table that we are too afraid to shake it. But really, that's what we need. We can't just be at the table and sitting pretty and just being thankful for people giving us opportunities, because that doesn't achieve anything. It just perpetuates the problem. It's like, I think we need to be not only outspoken, like you're saying, but really putting in the work where it's needed.
And I think it's a ripple effect, right? And I think that the best place that you can make change is locally in your own community, in your own network, in your own social circles. I think sometimes there's this idea of like, well, someone else will do it. Like Ava DuVernay, who's a sort of prolific filmmaker in Hollywood, who's been like just talk about a table shaker. She threw out the damn table altogether and just was like, no, this is the table and this is who's sitting here. She just really took Hollywood by storm and is one of the first she's an African-American filmmaker to really reach gender parity on sets, to create a new normal. And it's incredible that she's doing this heavy lifting, but she should not have to be doing it on her own. Like, we may not be Ava DuVernay, we may not be Michelle Obama, but we have small ways that we can impact change within our own circles, and you just never know how that's going to inspire, what seed you're going to plant with one person that could blossom into something else. And so I think ultimately that's the only power we have, like day to day, immediately. Now, of course, if you're a person of means or influence in other ways, then I would hope that you would leverage that to continue to do good. So
absolutely. And so that's a great segue, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask you is like, being a producer is so much about having your own tribe, right? The people that like you said, are good human beings that do a good job because you want to make this project work and have a good time. So there's a lot, I can imagine there's a lot of like, these are the people that I usually work with. How do you balance having your working team, your great working team, with also giving opportunities to young talent and to minorities?
Oftentimes, depending on the project and what needs I have and the infrastructure of that project, sometimes budgets are so low, it's just like me and one person. Sometimes I have the time and the money to hire more people. So if I have the time and the money, then I go out of my way to look for people that are up and coming, to look for people that are hungry. For example, there's a lovely young lady who is now my assistant who found me because of the podcast. You know, she found me on Instagram. She hit me up. She was like, I love what you're doing. Can I take you out for coffee? She wouldn't let me pay. She's like, I know this is expensive, but you're worth $5 of my time. And I was like, okay, you know, and she has no experience. She's been an assistant, but she wants to learn. And so for me, it's like the people that come and ask for the opportunities, I always remember them, because what I do is like, okay, well, I don't have anything for her yet, but when I do, I'll remember her. And if it is someone who I don't have an opportunity right now for, I'm always being asked, hey, do you know somebody who this? Do you know somebody who that? And enthusiasm and a great attitude will get you much further than experience in my business, you know, especially when you're starting on the ground floor, because all of the stuff that I've mentioned throughout this conversation, you can kind of learn. But being a person of integrity and having that fire, that stuff, like, it just comes in the package. You know what I mean? So when you identify that in someone, in any color that they are, I like to reward that behavior, because yes, I see a part of myself in that, and I know how hard the grind is. And so I know that sometimes going for coffee with someone can literally make their day, their month, their year, because they perceive you to be at some type of level that, you know, we don't see ourselves that way, but others do. And so it's that. And then I will, depending on the project, will go out of my way to find department heads, to find people that will create gender parity and will create a better representation behind the scenes of our set. And oftentimes, you know, I'll work with people who are a little more set in their ways, and they'll say, oh, well, I don't know any female assistant camera people. I don't know any, you know, Black or Latino grips. And I go, great, well, let me introduce you. So now you have people that you know, and maybe not on this project, but you should consider that. And so you have to just plant seeds as much as you can. And so it's a combo of honoring the people that have come up with you, but also, when possible, given opportunities for the people that are going to put in the work and are ready for the challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So you now have, like you mentioned, you have your own podcast. It's called Angle on Producers. Tell us a little bit about you know, your project and what you want to achieve with that.
Yeah. So Angle on Producers is a podcast I've had for almost 2 years. And it started as a desire to find the stories of producers who had come before me, because the producing path is so mysterious. Producers, like, what do they do? And people still ask me, what do you do exactly? And so I wanted to learn, one, why nobody really talks to producers. They talk to directors, they talk to writers, to actors. You'll hear from a producer if they were primarily a writer before, or somebody who was more famous in a different discipline. But the people that were working relentlessly behind the scenes to create the magic, I was like, why aren't these people, you know, when a film goes to a big film festival and you see the cast and the team up on stage, like, rarely is the producer there. And if they are, rarely are they given the mic to kind of have their moment. So I wanted to spotlight producers because I understand the value in what we do. I wanted to create a sense of community and to create a time capsule of all these incredible, predominantly women who have come before me or who are my colleagues, to understand the realities of what it takes to do this kind of work. So it's a place where you can go and learn a bit about that specific discipline. Like I mentioned, if you're a television producer versus a studio exec, like, what does that all mean? But really to show people that the facade of what you see isn't what it is. Like, to get to have these moments of success where you get to go to the Academy Awards or hang out with celebrities, that's like 1% of the time. The actual work is everything that happens behind the scenes. And it's hard. It's hard work, and it costs a lot, and it demands all of you, especially if you're in the indie space. And it's not to scare anybody. It's just to prepare them, because I wish I had this when I started. I wish I had access to this kind of information when I started. And so I wanted to create a library of, like I said, time capsule conversations that are real and honest and skew more towards lifestyle and mental health than, you know, really what's it like to, you know, produce a movie. But while still giving the listeners insight into that person's journey and the actual realities of their day to day as a producer. And so, it's Angle on Producers. You can just Google it, but angleonproducers.com. And, you know, really excited for 2021. Got some cool events and stuff up my sleeve, and it's another really great way for me to continue to amplify people, producers, women of color through this podcast. And so for me, it's really important that I create the space and the community and give back. It's another way of giving back and creating that access that a lot of people maybe who are coming up may feel like they don't have. Well, you can listen to them for an hour and you can learn a little bit of what they've gone through. And for me, it's also become like free therapy. It's made me a better producer. It's made me understand my own like ups and downs better. It's just been a gift. But it is a labor of love. It's a project that, doesn't pay me. I don't pay anybody. Like, it's just me doing it all with the very little free time I have, because I am an active working producer. And so it definitely has challenges where, sometimes I've been on set shooting and we'll be up till like 3 a.m. trying to finish an episode. Because I'm like, I said I would release on Tuesdays. I must, Sometimes I succeed, and finding the kindness when I can't reach my own goals has been also instrumental. But yeah, my dream is that it helps a lot of people, and it can reach anyone listening who is in some remote part of the world and doesn't feel like their dreams are possible. And through my story and my narrative and the conversations with these other incredible people, they can see that it is too possible for them, whether to be a producer, to be a filmmaker, to be an artist.
Yeah, you can be anything you
true.
want, really.
It's true.
You just have to put the work.
Yeah.
So what's one piece of advice that you heard on your podcast that you wish everybody knew?
I think because this is just like fresh on my mind, because this is from a recent episode, it's the concept of doing it with joy. Everything that you get to do, it's not a chore. Find the joy in it, even the little things that feel annoying in your life, in your work, in the pursuit, all of it, because we only get the one life. And I say often it's all about the journey, right? We, in the filmmaking world, anybody listening, I'm sure, has seen movies that turn out terrible and you're like, how did this get made? This is a piece of poop, but we cannot control the final destination. We cannot control who consumes it. We have best intentions, but there's just no guarantee. And so many things can go wrong along the way, that to get a movie that is finished, that is on your screen, that you can find, is a miracle, honestly, when you consider all the moving parts. So you have to remember that it's really all about the journey. And if you're going to be present in that journey, it's going to have its challenges, but can you find the joy in the thing you're doing, so that when you look back on your life and your pursuits, regardless of the external validation you get for your work, you can say, yeah, I lived a life of joy. I was a person of integrity. I showed up. I did my best. And that's enough. That's a life worth living. Yeah. And so that would be the advice I give.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carolina, for being on the podcast with us today.
Thank you for doing this. I'm so excited for you. Thank you for including me among a bunch of people who are way more qualified to be talking about their lives than I am.
No, absolutely
and
not.
And yeah, thank you to everyone listening. If anyone wants to find me, I'm at Carolina Groppa on Instagram, and pretty Googleable, if that's a word. You can find me all over the socials. And would love to hear from you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. And if you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, you can follow us on Instagram at LatinxCan. If you have questions or feedback for us, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you like this episode, please leave a review. It is the quickest way to grow as a community. Once again, thank you for listening, and remember, unidos somos más.